Chapter 22. Back to work. Days passed. Tommy's soreness faded away, and it wasn't long before he was fully recovered from his kidnapping. At least in the physical sense. Tommy spent his days lounging with either Tubbo and Ronbu, or Wilbur by his side. Because now that they had talked, Wilbur was back to being a clingy shit. Sometimes all of them would pile onto the couch and watch movies, although there was still a bit of tension between Wilbur and Tommy's roommates. It seemed to be getting better with each passing day, though, and Tommy wondered if one day Tubbo and Ronbu would consider the Soots as friends. He certainly hoped so. But now, with Tommy healed up, a new question hung over the entire Soot household. What happened now? Briefly, Tommy wondered if he was going to move back in with Tubbo and Ronbu since they'd made up, but that idea was quickly shut down by Wilbur reminding him that Dream was probably still going to be looking for him since his rescue. Just because Tommy was free now didn't mean Dream was going to give up, so they had to be careful until they could figure out what to do. Technoblade and Wilbur both wanted Tommy to stay in the house until they'd managed to, make a deal with Dream or take him down permanently. Just get him out of the way to ensure Tommy's safety. But there was no fucking way Tommy was going to go for that. He'd been stuck inside for 5 days and he was already going stir-crazy. Shockingly, despite how much he complained about his job, Tommy found himself actually missing going to work. That's how bored he was. When Tommy first approached Wilbur with the idea of going back to work at Puffy's, Wilbur laughed in his face. Are you fucking kidding? The last time you were at Puffy's you got kidnapped. You're insane if you think we're letting you go back to work. Wilbur scoffed, half sunken into the couch. Tommy frowned. I'm not just gonna stay in here forever. Plus Puffy's gotta be scrambling for someone to cover my shifts, and that's not really fair to her. Don't get me wrong, Puffy's like an aunt to me, but I think she'd rather you be safe and deal with being understaffed than let you get hurt again. Wilbur argued. Wilbur's right. Techno cut in from the kitchen where he was currently in the midst of peeling up, you guessed it, potatoes. We're not letting you get kidnapped again. It was pain enough the first time finding that dumb warehouse Dream rented. It was early evening. Outside, the setting sun had turned the city sky a dark shade of fiery orange, and Tommy knew that soon, Tubbo and Ronbu would be out in the city on patrol. Right now they were back at their apartment since, unlike Tommy, they didn't have any clothes of their own at the Soot house. They would be back later that night, but they were set to have Ender and Nuke do another swoop around Eastside, keeping an eye out for any sign of activity from Dream. So that meant the only people in the house were Tommy, Wilbur, Techno, and Phil. Just like before. On one hand, it was almost nostalgic. For things to feel the way they did before Tommy knew the Soot family's biggest secret. On the other hand, it was really fucking annoying, because now he knew he wasn't just dealing with the overprotective Soots, but the overprotective syndicate at the same time. But Techno! Tommy whined, dropping his head back against the couch. Come on, I'll be fine. Dream's not gonna try to kidnap me twice from the same place. He's not that fucking stupid. Tommy, we're not letting you go back to work. The risks are too high. Techno repeated. Huffing, Tommy glanced back at Wilbur, who was giving him a smug look. Tommy stuck his tongue out at him, and in turn Wilbur stretched his legs across the couch and kicked his thigh. Narrowing his eyes, Tommy kicked Wilbur back, and soon the two were kicking each other back and forth. It wasn't enough to hurt, but Tommy could tell it was annoying the shit out of Wilbur. And that's what was most important. Suddenly, Tommy landed a hard kick against Wilbur's side, and he hissed. You fucking gremlin! He exclaimed. You shouldn't have been kicking me, Tommy hissed. You stuck your tongue out at me, Wilbur argued. Oh, like sticking my tongue out at someone is the same as fucking kicking them, boys. Both Tommy and Wilbur fell silent at Phil's booming voice, the two of them sheepishly glancing above the couch to see Phil standing in the archway to the living room. Not for the first time, Tommy jumped, seeing Phil's massive black wings just casually sticking out of his old rock band t-shirt. Now that everyone was in on the secret, Phil had no reason to hide the wings around the house. And of course, Tommy knew that Phil was Zephyrus, but it was still startling to be reminded of all the same. "Phil!" Tommy whined after his moment of surprise passed, hoisting himself up so he was half draped across the back of the couch. "The bitchy duo over here won't let me go back to work." "Dad, please tell him he's crazy if he thinks we're letting him go back to the same place Dream kidnapped him," Wilbur said, shooting his dad a pleading look. Phil sighed, his feathers ruffling behind him. "You're gonna hate me for this, but actually I think Tommy has a point." "What?" Techno and Wilbur demanded at the same time. "I mean, it's not like we can just keep him here forever. He's got a life of his own, and even if Puffy understands the situation, it doesn't mean it's necessarily fair to her to just take one of her only baristas," Phil explained, walking to the kitchen so he was leaning against the kitchen counter. "Foolish has probably been working way too many double shifts since Tommy got taken." "Phil, come on, you gotta understand how risky that is," Techno asked, turning away from his potatoes to raise an eyebrow at Phil. "I wasn't saying we send him out there with no protection," Phil shot back. "Obviously, we'd have someone from the syndicate assigned to stay at work with you and get you home, Tommy." Tommy shrugged. While it wasn't ideal, it wasn't like he was trying to hide his healing business from anyone anymore. Having someone there to keep an eye on him really wouldn't be much of a bother in the long run. "That's fine by me." "See, he agrees," Phil said, gesturing to Tommy while shooting Techno and Wilbur sharp looks. "I think we need at least 2 of us assigned to you every night," Wilbur argued, looking back at Tommy. "Will, I get where you're coming from, but we don't exactly have the numbers for that," Phil cut in. "Besides, I think having 1 person there should be plenty to get Tommy away should Dream show up. The goal wouldn't be to fight Dream head-on. The goal would just be to get Tommy back here as quickly as possible." "I don't like it," Techno huffed. "Me neither," Wilbur agreed. "I have no issues with this arrangement," Tommy said, flashing Phil a bright smile. Phil shot him a fond smile back, while Wilbur rolled his eyes. "If it makes you two feel better, I want to open this as an actual discussion at the next syndicate meeting," Phil continued, glancing at both Wilbur and Techno. "Everyone's gonna take our side, I bet," Wilbur snorted. "Will, I swear, if you use your voice to rig the vote, me, I would never. Philza, how dare you accuse me of such a thing?" Wilbur gasped in fake offense. "You're such a dramatic little shit," Phil muttered, shaking his head. "But anyway, we're gonna have a discussion about that, and we're all just going to need to fill Tommy in since there's really no point in keeping stuff a secret from him now." Tommy frowned, straightening up in his seat. "Wait, what do you mean by fill me in? Fill me in on what?" And there it was again, that fond smile. "Everything, Tommy. We're gonna fill you in on everything." Holy shit. Holy shit! Did that mean Tommy was going to get to learn why they formed the syndicate in the first place? And what their goal was? Sure, everyone knew the syndicate's general goal was to take down the Hero Committee, but there was obviously so much more to it than that. But the syndicate were a mysterious group, and for the most part, their motivations were shrouded in secrecy. But apparently, Tommy was going to be told everything. He had to admit, he was pretty excited. "Also, I think you should go to work tomorrow, Tommy," Phil then added after a few moments. "Huh?" Techno blurted out as he dropped a potato in a pot of water. "Tomorrow?" Wilbur exclaimed. "What? No, he's still recovering." "I'm fine, asshole," Tommy argued, clambering higher up against the couch. "No, you're not. You literally broke, like, half your fucking bones. And I have healing powers, dumbass. It still takes energy out of you." "Yeah, but I've gotten it back now. Wilbur!" Phil snapped, seemingly fed up with Wilbur and Tommy's bickering. Wilbur's mouth immediately snapped shut as he spared a nervous look at his father. Tommy had to fight the urge to snicker, knowing it would probably earn him a similarly stern look from Phil. I understand you're worried, but I genuinely think Tommy needs to get out of the house just for his own mental health's sake. You'll stay with him in the cafe throughout his entire shift, and you'll bring him back here afterwards so we can all take him to the meeting as a group. Does that sound all right to you? Phil asked, pinching the bridge of his nose. Glancing between Phil and Tommy, Wilbur huffed and folded his arms over his chest. I guess I can live with that. Turning back to Tommy, Phil raised an eyebrow. Think you can handle the dramatic one over there during your shift tomorrow? Hey? I don't know, Phil. This is a pretty big favor you're asking, Tommy said, letting out an exaggerated sigh as he fell back into the cushions. Having to put up with a bitch like Wilbur is so exhausting. Oh, you little... Come here! Before Tommy could do anything, Wilbur was lunging at him. Tommy yelped as he got pulled into a headlock, struggling against Wilbur's grip as Wilbur tried to push him off the couch. Phil! Techno, help me! Tommy yelled. Techno stared at the two fighting for a beat, before snorting and looking back at his potatoes. Phil just shrugged and left the room, ignoring Tommy's pleas for mercy as Wilbur pinned Tommy down, laughing all the while. In the end, Tommy may have accidentally elbowed Wilbur in the face and given him a bloody nose, but it was his own fault for being a dick. Though, of course, Tommy ended up healing it for Wilbur, despite Wilbur's protests that it was just a little bit of blood. That night, Tommy texted Puffy to tell her he was going to come in to work the next day. After she checked to make sure it was all right with the syndicate, she seemed very relieved at the idea of having Tommy back at work, and Tommy couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for being gone for so long, even though he knew it wasn't his fault. Surprisingly, Tubbo and Rombu seemed fine with the plan for Tommy to go back to work, as long as Wilbur was there the whole time. As it turned out, with Dream having been off the radar since Tommy's rescue, petty crime was spiking, especially in Eastside. This meant Tubbo and Rombu were even busier than usual, so they were going to be patrolling again the next night. A part of Tommy didn't like the idea of them out patrolling while he was stuck in a meeting with the syndicate, but at the same time, he knew that if the worst happened and one of them got hurt, it would probably be better to be with the syndicate so they could drive him to wherever Tubbo and Rombu were, since the cafe was kind of unusable as a clinic now, considering Dream could ambush them at any moment there. So the next day passed with Tommy lounging around the house like he had been for the past few days, but this time with excitement running through his veins at actually getting to go do something again. Sure, it was work, but considering how unbelievably bored he was, he'd take just about anything. When late afternoon rolled around, Techno drove Wilbur and Tommy to the Cloudy Cafe. Walking in, Tommy hesitated for just a beat by the front door, remembering the bone-chilling fear that had run through him when he'd walked out of those doors and found himself face to face with Dream. But then Wilbur placed a hand on his shoulder, and Tommy reminded himself that he was safe, that Wilbur was going to watch out for him, and things would be fine. As soon as the two of them made their way through the doors, there was an unholy shriek of joy from behind the coffee bar. Tommy! Foolish yelled, nearly jumping over the bar to run towards him. Tommy grunted in surprise as the man wrapped him up in a tight hug, and for a brief moment Tommy wondered if Puffy had told Foolish the truth about what had happened. Then, I am so happy you're back, Foolish giggled, practically dropping all his weight onto Tommy. I'm never gonna shit-talk the way you organize the bar again. I literally can't keep doing your shifts, man. Tommy blinked, stiffly hugging Foolish back. Sorry? You're forgiven, as long as you never leave me to cover all your shifts again, Foolish said, taking another beat before pulling himself back from the hug. Now, getting a proper look at Foolish, it was easy to see that he was probably on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was swaying on his feet the longer he stared at Tommy with a manic smile on his face. While Tommy was sure Puffy had probably taken a few shifts herself to cover, It was clear that Foolish had gotten the majority of the work thrust onto him, and Tommy wouldn't wish that on anyone. Not even Dream. "Don't worry, I just got, really fucking sick. But I'm all good to work now," Tommy reassured him, awkwardly patting his arm. Foolish smiled and nodded at this, although his eyes were glazed over in a way that told Tommy he was nearly asleep on his feet. "Okay, cool, great. You do that, and I'm gonna go pass out for the next 18 hours, he told Tommy, taking off his apron and shoving it into Tommy's arms. Before Tommy could respond, Foolish stumbled away from him and Wilbur and out the cafe doors. Both Tommy and Wilbur silently watched Foolish from the windows until he disappeared around the corner, leaving Tommy back in control of the cafe. "Is he okay?" Wilbur asked with a frown. "I don't think so," Tommy replied. There was a beat of silence between them. Then, Tommy unfolded the apron and pulled it over his head. "All right, well, I should get to work. You, go sit somewhere and don't bug me." Wilbur smirked. "But bugging you at work is how we became friends in the first place." Tommy narrowed his eyes. "I'll spit in your coffee." "No, you won't. You're too nice," Wilbur teased, flicking Tommy's forehead. While Tommy wanted to argue, he knew Wilbur was right, and that Tommy wouldn't go that far because that was just gross. "Fuck off," Tommy grumbled as he made his way back behind the coffee bar. Wilbur, in all his bitchy glory, sauntered up to the counter and rested his elbows in front of the register. "Let me be your first customer of the day." "Ugh, fine, what do you want?" "Flat white," Wilbur told him. Rolling his eyes, Tommy rang him up and watched as Wilbur went over to his usual table in the corner. It was strange. Despite so much having changed, there was so much familiarity in this routine. Bickering with Wilbur during his shifts, trying to figure out ways to fuck with him to make his job more entertaining. So much was different now, but in a way it was like nothing had happened at all. It was so easy to fall back into his work. Tommy barely thought as he pulled the espresso shots and grabbed a bottle of caramel, fully intending to not make Wilbur the drink he ordered just to fuck with him. Late afternoon suns streamed through the large windows of the cafe, once again bathing everything in gorgeous shades of gold and orange. The smell of roasting coffee beans filled the air, and Tommy's shoulders slumped as he took a moment to close his eyes and just breathe in his work. A few minutes later, Tommy was sliding Wilbur's cup onto the pickup bar. He called out Wilbur's name, and Wilbur smirked as he sauntered back over to the bar to grab the drink. When Wilbur picked the cup up, he huffed at the words written on the side. "Pussy boy, really?" Wilbur asked, raising an eyebrow at him. "It's what you are," Tommy shrugged, trying to keep his expression neutral as Wilbur took his first sip of the drink. As expected, Wilbur instantly frowned at the taste. "What? Is this a caramel macchiato?" "Yep," Tommy answered, popping the P. "You brat!" Wilbur exclaimed, scowling at him. "You know I think caramel macchiatos are way too sweet." "Shouldn't have put me in that headlock yesterday," Tommy told him, struggling to stifle his laughter. Wilbur's scowl deepened. "Make me my proper drink." "Nope. Maybe if you're nicer to me, I'll make you the right drink later tonight," Tommy teased, flipping him off as he went to go help a customer waiting at the register. Huffing, Wilbur stalked back over to his table, and Tommy was pretty sure he heard him mumble, "Fucking gremlin," under his breath as he reluctantly sipped at his coffee. And just like that, Tommy was back on the clock. An hour and a half passed with nothing very noteworthy happening. Customers filed in, Tommy made coffee, the espresso machine took a shit, and Tommy spent 10 minutes cussing at it until he managed to get it working again. And Wilbur worked on his laptop the entire time. The yellow light of the setting sun turned darker and darker until it disappeared completely. Night was falling earlier now that it was getting close to winter, and Tommy had to admit, he was grateful he wasn't going to have to walk to the subway in the chilly air tonight. Then there was the sound of a chiming door, and Tommy's attention was pulled to the front as two customers made their way to the register. It was a man and a woman, and Tommy realized he recognized the woman. With her cotton candy pink hair, razor-sharp eyeliner, and her kind smile. Tommy thought back to a time she'd stopped by and tipped him far more than she needed to. The man with her was unfamiliar, albeit rather nondescript, with the only noticeable thing about him being his shaved head. Putting on his customer service grin, Tommy greeted them as they came up to the counter. "Welcome to the Cloudy Cafe. What can I get you?" I think I'll have a small mocha," the woman told him, something warm flashing in her eyes. "And I'll have one of those, blended caramel coffee things," the guy chimed in, gesturing vaguely to the menu. Tommy frowned. "You mean the caramel frappe?" "Yep, that thing." The guy nodded. Shrugging, Tommy wrote down the drinks on the cups before meeting the woman's eyes again. "All right, name?" The woman met his eyes steadily, a grin tugging at the corners of her lips. "Nikki." Nodding, Tommy started to write the name down on the cup, but froze before he'd even gotten to the K. Nikki. Nikki was Nemesis's real name. The girl had the same cotton candy hair that Nemesis did. She was the same height and build as the villain as well. As the realization dawned on Tommy's face, Nikki let her warm grin take over her face. "It's good to see you again, Tommy," she said softly. "Holy shit," Tommy whispered. This was Nemesis. Without even thinking about it, Tommy rushed around the counter, and Nikki immediately pulled him into a hug. He laughed as he bent down to hug her properly, and he felt her own laughter dance through her shoulders as he squeezed her tight. They stayed like that for a few moments, Tommy too shocked to even think of what Nemesis just casually identity revealing to him implied, before the two of them were interrupted by a cough. Glancing up, Tommy saw the guy with the shaved head smirking at him. "Hey up, mate," the guy said. Oh, Tommy was fucking stupid. "Both of you are here?" Tommy asked, letting go of Nikki and giving Thanatos a hug. "Of course we are. We wanted to come by and see if you were okay," Nikki explained. "Name's Jack, by the way." No, Jack told him, patting his shoulder a few times before pulling away from the hug. "It's really good to see you, man." Nemesis and Thanatos. Nikki and Jack. Such normal names for the two villains that were the entire reason he actually decided to start helping the Syndicate willingly. "Fucking hell, it's good to see you guys too," Tommy laughed. And it was good to see them. Besides the Soots, Nemesis and Thanatos had been the closest to being his friends out of the rest of the Syndicate. It was just surprisingly nice to see them here. But then the full realization hit Tommy. "Wait, why the fuck did you two just reveal your faces to me?" Tommy asked, frowning at them. "Isn't that breaking the Syndicate rules?" Before either of them could respond, though, another voice joined in the fray. Well. Looks like you guys were too impatient to wait for tonight." Wilbur chuckled as he walked up to the counter. Nikki, at least, seemed a bit sheepish. "Come on, can you blame us? You and Phil and Tech haven't told us anything about how he's doing." "I told you he was fine," Wilbur argued. "Yeah, but nothing else," Nikki said, shooting Wilbur a pointed look. "Besides, you got to reveal all dramatically to him right before he passed out, so you can't say shit," Jack added. "Plus we were both craving coffee, so we figured why not?" Wilbur huffed. "I mean, I know I don't actually give a shit, but Phil and Techno are super strict on that stuff." Tommy listened to the conversation going on, a few more puzzle pieces falling into place. "Wait, so you guys all know each other's identities?" Tommy asked, lowering his voice to make sure no one else in the cafe could hear, despite the fact that no one was paying attention to them. "We do," Wilbur nodded. "You were the only one we kept out of the loop. Everyone else already knew each other's names and faces." But it's probably best for us not to go into it here, Nikki pointed out, glancing around the cafe. We'll be able to talk more about it tonight. Tommy raised his eyebrows. Wait, so are all of you guys gonna... That should be the plan, unless Phil changes his mind, Wilbur answered before he even finished. But since you know who 5 out of the 8 are, I don't think Phil would go back now. Holy shit. Tommy was going to learn everyone's identities in the syndicate tonight. Is that even safe? Tommy asked, thinking back to 404. The worst has already happened, and we're not going to let you-know-who get his hands on you again, Wilbur told him, brown eyes meeting blue. You deserve to know, after everything you've been through. Fuck. They really trusted him that much. If anyone asked Tommy if that made him a bit choked up, he would say that was ridiculous to even ask, because he was a big man who didn't get choked up at silly shit like that. But, well, if he quickly excused himself from the conversation to make Nikki and Jack's drinks because his vision was getting a little blurry, well, that was none of their business. After he made Nikki and Jack their drinks, they went to sit at Wilbur's table, and the 3 fell into a hushed conversation Tommy couldn't make out from the coffee bar. Another few hours passed without much fanfare, and it wasn't long before Nikki and Jack had to head out. They both promised they'd see him in a few hours, though, and Tommy waved them out while fighting to contain his bright smile. Soon, customers started filtering out of the shop. Laptops were closed, empty cups were tossed in trash cans, and it wasn't long before Wilbur was the only one left in the cafe. At one point, Tommy slid out another hot coffee cup onto the pickup bar. Bitch boy, come get your flat white, Tommy yelled across the shop as he began to wipe down the counters. Wilbur laughed as he grabbed his drink, giving Tommy a wry smile when he met his gaze. Aw, did the child feel bad for being mean to Big Brother Wilby? He teased. Tommy blinked, fighting the sudden urge he had to smack Wilbur in the face. I will dump that coffee on your stupid fucking head if you don't shut up. Sure you will. You'll dump the drink you just spent time making on a floor you'd have to clean. Wilbur cut himself off with a yelp when Tommy lunged across the counter, trying to make a grab for the cup. I swear you're a fucking feral raccoon. I'll bite you, Tommy threatened. You know, I don't think I doubt that anymore, Wilbur snorted. After that, Tommy finished cleaning up the rest of the cafe, and Wilbur waited by the door like he had so many times in the past. This time, though, he wasn't scrolling through his phone like he usually did while he waited for Tommy to finish up. Instead, his eyes were locked on the windows, watching like a sentry for any sign of movement outside. Right when Tommy was heading towards the door, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the cafe, which Tommy recognized as the same one they took when he went to the first syndicate meeting. Wilbur kept an arm wrapped around his shoulders as Tommy locked the doors to the cafe. Tommy leaned into him, his heart beating a little louder in his chest than usual at being outside the cafe in the middle of the night, just like before. They went straight to the SUV, though, and Tommy didn't see any sign of Dream or 404. When they climbed in, Tommy saw Techno was driving again, with Phil sitting up front, meaning Wilbur had to sit in the back with him. The two of them were already decked out in their villain outfits, and after Tommy and Wilbur had settled themselves in the back seat, Phil tossed a bundle of clothes at Wilbur's face. You can get changed when we get there, Will, Phil said, his voice changer turned off for the time being. Despite the fact that Tommy obviously knew Phil was Zephyrus, it was still disconcerting to hear his voice come out from under Zephyrus's veil. This was definitely going to take a bit of getting used to, Tommy could tell. Couldn't you have just let me change in the bathroom of the cafe? Wilbur asked, frowning at the front seat. I don't know about you, but I'd rather not see a news report about Siren walking out of a well-beloved cafe in Eastside. Techno deadpanned, making Tommy snort. Who knows? Maybe I'll just tell the news that Siren loves my coffee. Tommy joked. Imagine if you just came into the cafe in the full getup, Will. How do you think my customers would react to that? That's probably not something we want to deal with, so let's not talk about making the Cloudy Cafe a regular haunt for Siren. Phil cut in. Anyway, Tommy, how was work? Tommy shrugged, slumping back into his seat. It was fine. Wilbur snorted. Fine. You're not going to mention the fact that you learned Nemesis and Thanatos' real names? Tommy shot Wilbur a flat stare. Well, I didn't know if it was okay to tell Phil about that or not. Wait, you meant Nikki and Jack in their civilian forms? Phil questioned, twisting around in his seat to actually look at Tommy. He did, yeah. They basically just went up to the register to order their drinks and told him outright. Wilbur laughed. I mean, I don't think it's a big deal, since that was going to happen tonight anyway. The two of them just wanted to see him and make sure he was okay. But they won't get in trouble, right? Tommy asked, furrowing his brows. Because I don't want them to get in trouble because of me. Phil chuckled. No, don't worry. I'm not going to scold Nemesis and Thanatos because they wanted to properly introduce themselves to you before everyone else could. Okay, that's good. Tommy murmured, leaning against the window and watching the street lamps blur into one streak of orange light. The rest of the drive was quiet after that. Tommy waited for them to get closer to the syndicate compound, to the point where they would blindfold him again, but it never came. They crossed through South Bay and further up until they were nearing the middle of the city, with the buildings changing from nice townhouses to actual skyscrapers. It wasn't until they pulled into the parking garage of a nondescript office building that Tommy realized they just weren't going to blindfold him at all. There was the steep decline Tommy had remembered making him feel sick before with the blindfold on. The underground parking structure was dark, only lit up every few spaces with harsh white light, making the entire place feel very eerie. There were no cars in any of the parking spots either, with everyone who worked in that building clearly having gone home for the day. The car drove deeper and deeper into the parking garage until they were at the bottom level. Then, Techno pulled the SUV into a random empty spot and cut the engine. We're here, Techno announced. So, there's really no blindfold this time? Tommy asked, glancing between the three of them. No blindfold this time. Phil reassured him, lifting up his veil to flash Tommy a reassuring smile. Nodding, Tommy hopped out of the car, shoes smacking against the concrete as Techno and Phil did the same. Wilbur didn't get out of the car, though, and it took a moment for him to realize that when Phil said Wilbur could change into his siren clothes when they got there, he meant change in the car. It was pretty funny to listen to Wilbur struggle to change in the narrow confines of the back seat of the car. There was a lot of grunting, swearing, and at one point a foot smacked against the window. But then, finally, Siren climbed out of the SUV, donning his black coat, dark jeans, heavy boots, and his signature blindfold. I hate changing in the car, you know that, Techno. Wilbur hissed as soon as he was on his feet again, Techno locking the car as Phil led them towards an elevator near the wall. Wouldn't be such a problem if you didn't decide skinny jeans just had to be part of your supervillain wardrobe. Techno shot back with a smirk. Wilbur scoffed. It's about having a cohesive look. Besides, I'm not one to do a whole bunch of physical fighting, so the jeans work out fine unless I need to change in the backseat of a fucking car. By the way, I've always wanted to ask. Tommy suddenly chimed in, shoving his way between the two brothers. How the fuck do you even see out of that mask? Oh, it's just got like dark mesh around the eyes, while the rest is just solid fabric. But it's hidden well, so you can't really see the mesh from the outside. Wilbur explained. I used to put dark makeup around my eyes to kind of hide them even more behind all the black, but eventually I got lazy, so I stopped doing it. You mean I called you an emo and you got mad? Techno huffed. Phil snickered at this comment, but didn't say anything as he pressed the button for the elevator. I did not stop just because you called me an emo, Wilbur protested, punching Techno in the arm. Besides, it's not emo to try and wear makeup that helps conceal my goddamn identity. Sure, Techno drawled. Keep telling yourself that while you walk around in Doc Martens and a black trench coat. Wilbur let out an indignant noise as the elevator chimed, signaling its arrival. The four of them all piled into the small metal box, with Phil pressing the B10 button before beginning their descent down. The elevator jolted as it moved deeper and deeper underground. Once again, Tommy wondered if this whole building was used for syndicate stuff, or if they just rented out this one underground office for their dramatic villain meetings. Once the elevator stopped, the doors opened to reveal that same plain, undecorated hallway that led straight to the double doors of the meeting room. Now out of the elevator, Phil rolled his shoulders to manifest his wings, having had them hidden during the car ride. The double doors to the syndicate room were no less impressive than they were the first time Tommy saw them. The intricate carvings were just as stunning as he remembered them, and Tommy made a mental note to ask at some point who the fuck did the interior decorating for the syndicate. When Phil opened the doors to the meeting room and led them inside, Tommy was met with the waiting faces of all the other syndicate members he'd come to know so well. Daedalus, Jester, Rosethorn, Nemesis, and Thanatos had already taken their seats. Phil took his place at the head of the table, with Techno sitting at the other end. Wilbur and him sat in the same seats they had before, and despite the fact that Tommy knew the syndicate far better than he did the first time he'd been in here, he couldn't ignore the nerves buzzing in his chest. As soon as everyone was settled, Phil wasted no time in jumping right into things. "Hey guys, glad you all could make it on such short notice," Phil said, folding his hands in front of him. "As you all know, tonight we are welcoming Tommy in as a full member of the syndicate." Tommy's eyes widened. "Wait, I'm what?" All eyes in the room suddenly turned to him. "Phil, did you forget to tell the fucking kid he was going to be a syndicate member?" Jester asked, his feet resting up on the table. "Well, no, I didn't forget. I told you yesterday, Tommy," Phil said, lifting his veil so he could meet his eyes. "I said we were going to tell you everything." "Okay, but how was I supposed to know that meant I'd be an official member of the syndicate?" Tommy asked, his heart pounding in his ears. Phil's brows furrowed. "I mean, I thought it was obvious. You already worked for us, so this is just the next step." He paused then, something worried flashing over his gaze. "Do you not want to be a member of the syndicate, Tommy?" The question was gentle. There was no pressure or judgment in Phil's voice, just genuine concern. But even still, Tommy couldn't help but shrink back in his chair as all the eyes in the room stayed squarely on him. It wasn't that he didn't want to be a member of the syndicate. Phil was right in saying that he basically already was. This would just be making it official. But if Tommy agreed to this, he could no longer say he was just a civilian. He would officially be a villain. Or at least in the city's eyes he would be. Either way, he'd be choosing to fully join this world that he had tried so hard to stay out of. Suddenly, there was a warm hand on his shoulder. Wilbur had pulled up his mask and was staring at him with worried eyes. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Tommy stared at Wilbur, trying to think if he was okay or not. While he was definitely shocked, he knew that he was already in this world. Hell, he'd already been kidnapped by a hero. Tommy had lost his civilian card long ago, and at this point, he knew full well there was no way to get it back. Besides, his family was here, weren't they? He'd chosen this as his family, and when he told Wilbur he didn't go back on that stuff, he meant it. Again, this was just making things official. "No, I want it," Tommy said after a few beats of silence. "Sorry, just confused me for a second." Relief washed over Phil's face as he nodded. "Okay, that's good to hear. Then we'll cast a vote. All those in favor of Tommy joining the syndicate, raise your hands." Immediately, everyone at the table raised their hands. There wasn't an ounce of hesitation in anyone's eyes, and warmth bloomed in Tommy's chest at their trust. "All right, then that's settled. We'll need to come up with a code name for you at some point, Tommy, but for now we have bigger things to focus on," Phil said, lifting the hat with his veil entirely off his head. "You all know the drill. Masks off." And just like that, with those simple words, everyone in the syndicate took their masks off. Techno rested his boar skull on the table. Wilbur shoved his blindfold in his pocket. Nikki set her masquerade mask lightly on her lap. Jack moved his skull mask on top of his head. But these were the faces he already knew. There was a loud whirring noise as Daedalus pulled his mechanical mask off his face. His eyes faded from being entirely pitch black to having normal dark green irises. As Tommy took in his face, he realized he had definitely seen Daedalus before. "What? You came to the cafe?" Tommy exclaimed. "You brought your dog to see me?" Daedalus laughed and nodded. "Yup, Fran really likes you. You gave her whipped cream once, and you earned her undying loyalty." Wow. Tommy really shouldn't be surprised, considering Daedalus literally told him he'd been to the cafe before. But it was still strange to think about it in retrospect. "I'm Sam, by the way." Daedalus introduced himself. Sam. What a boring name for such a badass guy. "Nice to meet you, Sam." Tommy snorted. "Nice to meet you too, Tommy." Then, there was a pointed cough to Sam's left, and Tommy's eyes fell on another familiar face. "Hannah?" Tommy asked, recognizing the waitress from Bad's diner. "You're a villain?" "Yup, sure am." Hannah grinned, playing with her tree bark mask in her hands. "Let me tell you, it was so fucking hard to keep a straight face every time you and Wilbur came in for dinner." "Sorry about that, Hannah. But he wanted muffins, and it's not like I could just say no," Wilbur defended. Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Still a dick move, Soot," she teased. "But it's nice to properly meet you, Tommy." "You too." Tommy chuckled, leaning back further in his seat. This only left one other person in the room Tommy didn't know. He turned his head to the left, and found himself staring into a young man's face with a jagged scar going through his left eye. "I fucking knew it," Tommy whispered, meeting Jester's eyes. "I knew that was your real face." Jester chuckled. "I could see it in your eyes that you knew I was bullshitting you with the whole, oh, it's a random stranger off the street. Truth is, I was just too fucking tired to put on a different face. And I knew I could trust you at that point, so I figured it was fine." Tommy grinned. "Well, tell me your name then." "Call me Quackity," he told Tommy, grinning wide enough to show a gold tooth he had embedded under where the scar went through his eye. "Wait, did Quackity already show you his face?" Techno asked, frowning as he looked between the two of them. "Technically, yeah," Quackity snorted. "Can't trust any of you little shits," Phil muttered, although his voice was fond as he shook his head. For those who don't know, apparently Nikki and Jack took matters into their own hands and introduced themselves to Tommy earlier today. All the eyes then fell onto Jack and Nikki, both of whom were smirking in their seats. "What can I say? We wanted coffee," Jack huffed. "Can't believe Sam and I are the only ones who can keep a secret identity," Hannah muttered. "Hey, I kept it a secret too. Tommy just guessed mine on his own," Wilbur protested. "Like you weren't trying to get him to figure it out by being as obvious as possible. Okay, boys?" Phil said, cutting Techno off. "I know you all like to bicker about stupid shit, but we actually have more business to attend to this meeting, so we should get on with it." Folding his hands in front of him again, Phil focused back on Tommy. "Tommy, do you have any particular questions for us, or should we just start at the beginning?" Tommy gulped as he tried to think if he had any particular questions. There was just so much he felt he didn't know about the syndicate. Trying to come up with a single question to encapsulate everything he was wondering about felt impossible. "I mean, I guess I just want to know what the hell you're all even trying to do," Tommy said, bringing his knees up onto the chair. Phil nodded. "That's a good place to start. To give you the short answer, our goal is to destroy the institution of the Hero Committee, and get rid of the entire system of government-sanctioned heroes. And to take down the government, and establish an anarchical society in its place. Techno chimed in. Well, yes, that too, but that part comes later, Phil said, dipping his head at Techno. Our primary focus is the Hero Committee. Tommy blinked, wondering if he'd heard that right. Oh, yeah, so nothing too big or anything, he drawled sarcastically, mind reeling at how insane that sounded. I know it seems like a lot to take on, but the captain was the last bastion of any kind of good that existed in the hero system, Phil explained, leaning back in his seat. She was the last hope we had in possibly reforming things. Now we aim to take down the system entirely because it's far too corrupt to try and fix. The idea of paying people with the most powerful abilities in the city to play cops, but with even less restrictions, is just a recipe for disaster, Techno added, folding his arms over his chest. Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense, Tommy muttered, glancing at the table. But you want to take down the government too? Both Wilbur and Techno answered at the same time. Not necessarily. Yes. The two brothers gave each other incredulous looks, and Tommy would have laughed if he wasn't still struggling to process everything they were saying. Wilbur, Techno started, staring intensely at his younger brother. You know we've talked about this. Please don't get us into this fucking argument again. Quackity groaned, dragging his hands down his face. Tommy frowned, looking between all the tired faces of the different syndicate members. He had a feeling this had been a conversation they had gone through several times before. Can someone tell me what I'm missing here? He asked. We have different ideas about what our next steps will be after the Hero Committee is gone, Sam cut in to explain, much to Tommy's relief. Phil, Techno, and Nikki are anarchists, and want to take down the government entirely. Wilbur, Jack, Hannah, and myself are more on the side of government reform. And I don't really give a shit either way, as long as I can keep running my business, Quackity said, folding his arms behind his head. But we're going to cross that bridge when we get to it, Phil said, giving Tommy a reassuring smile. Although I would prefer anarchy, I'm not completely against the idea of government reform myself. I am. But either way, none of this is relevant until we first take down the Hero Committee, Phil continued, ignoring Techno's interruption. Huh. Okay. Well, Tommy already knew Techno was an anarchist, considering he had rambled to Tommy about anarchist theory multiple times. But he hadn't realized Phil and Nikki were anarchists as well. In truth, Tommy didn't really understand much about anarchism, so it wasn't like he had a super strong opinion on the subject. So he decided not to comment on that, and figured he could learn more about it when it actually became more relevant to the Syndicate's goals, which at the moment it didn't seem like it was. Alright, focus on the Hero Committee first, I get that, Tommy muttered, nodding to himself. He looked up to meet Phil's eyes again as another question appeared in his mind. How did this all start in the first place, though? I feel like I just woke up one day and the Syndicate was all over the news. How did I come to create the Syndicate in the first place? Phil asked. Tommy nodded, and Phil took a breath. Well, that's going to require a bit of backstory. Tugging his hair out of his ponytail, Phil ran his hands through his hair before taking a breath and straightening up. When I first started out as a villain, I didn't have any goals to destroy the Hero Committee or take down the government or any of that shit. The truth is that I was a single dad who had unexpectedly ended up with 2 kids in a very short period of time, and money became way more of a problem than I thought it would be, Phil explained, looking between Wilbur and Techno before returning his gaze to Tommy. I didn't necessarily want to turn to crime, but I'd already had my issues with the way the heroes ignored the poorer neighborhoods, so it was easy to decide that if I needed to rob a bank to make sure my boys got to eat dinner, then I was gonna go rob a bank. Pausing, Phil's expression darkened. It didn't take long for me to learn the truth about the way the Hero Committee dealt with villains, and how they manipulated the media in their favor. It wasn't as bad as it is now. The only hero who was working at this time that I think you would have even heard of is the captain, but it was still pretty damn corrupt. When I realized this, I got fucking pissed. The entire system that was put in place to protect the Manburg citizens was a lie, and the only people who knew the truth about it were the villains. Tommy leaned forward in his seat when Phil took another pause, enraptured by the story. Still, I was a pretty minor villain for my first 5 or so years. I just did what I had to take care of my kids. I didn't want to get involved in anything too intense, because the last thing I wanted was for Will and Tech to get caught up in that shit. Little did you know, we knew the whole time what you were doing. Wilbur cut in, smirking a bit. You weren't subtle about it, Dad. Like at all. I tried my best, okay? Phil huffed, grinning sheepishly. Well, you sucked at it, old man. Techno teased. But yeah, Will and I knew the whole time that Phil was a villain. So when we thought we were old enough, we both decided we wanted to help him out. I still remember the first time you brats showed up during a fight because you followed me. Phil mumbled, dragging a hand down his face. Gave me about 20 fucking heart attacks that night. But it was worth it because we proved our point, Wilbur said. We proved to you we could help, and you let us join you. Only because I knew you two would just start sneaking out to do shit on your own if I said no. I wanted to at least be able to keep an eye on you, Phil argued. But yeah, basically, when Wilbur was around 18, and Techno was 19, the two of them decided they wanted to be villains too and wouldn't take no for an answer. So the 3 of us formed our little group, and together we could actually accomplish a lot more than what I was able to do on my own. Also I, unlike Phil, who had just been an edgy lone wolf up until then, actually started talking to other villains we ran into. Wilbur cut in, smiling proudly. And I found out the others actually thought a lot of the same things we did about the Hero Committee. Does it really count when you literally mentored one of our only 2 allies at that point? Techno asked, raising an eyebrow at Wilbur. You're the one who taught Fundy to hate the Hero Committee just as much as we did. Wilbur rolled his eyes. He was going to hate them anyway. I just happened to run into him during his first attempt at robbing a place. Wait, did Wilbur just say Fundy? You mean to tell me the fucking fried chicken food truck guy is a villain? Tommy asked, shooting Wilbur a confused look. He was a villain. Went by the name Volpez because he was a sneaky little shit who could turn invisible. He later retired and now has the food truck you and I love so much. Wilbur explained, nudging Tommy's shoulder. Faintly, Tommy remembered hearing 1 or 2 things about a villain called Volpez, although he couldn't recall much. Having the power to turn invisible is probably what kept him under the radar, though Tommy would probably try to Google stuff on him when he got home. But why did he retire? Tommy asked, figuring he must not have been a villain for very long, since his food truck seemed rather well established. At this, a hush fell over the table as everyone's smiles disappeared, as if a candle had been blown out and darkness had descended. There was a tense silence, and the group shared knowing looks with one another, with even Quackity looking serious for the first time all night. Have you ever heard of the villain H-94, Tommy? Phil asked after a few beats of silence. Tommy frowned, trying to think if he could remember anything about an H-94. There was some faint flicker of a memory there, but it was barely anything substantial. I've heard the name, but not much else, Tommy answered. Well, his real name was H-Bomb, and besides me, Will, and Techno, he was the first official member of the syndicate. Phil explained, staring at the table as he spoke. He was a kind man who had been put in a similar position as myself, where he became a villain to survive. He agreed with us about the unfairness of the Hero Committee, so we agreed to start working together to find a way to take them down. Tommy noticed how they were only referring to H-Bomb in the past tense, and dread began to pool in his gut. What happened to him? Tommy whispered. Dream happened, Techno said, clenching his jaw. Me, H-Bomb, and Phil were in a fight against Dream, Flame, and the Captain. At the time, Dream and Flame were both still newbies on the scene, and we weren't really sure what either of them were capable of. All we knew was that Dream was being mentored by the captain, and we hardly knew anything about Flame. But the captain was someone we were familiar with, and she had always been one of the only good heroes in the system, so we trusted she'd keep her new kid in line. From there, Phil picked up the story. That wasn't what happened, though. The fight got rough. Techno was fighting the captain, while Dream seemed like he was still struggling a bit with using his powers. And when H-Bomb went for Flame, well, Dream killed him. Distantly, Tommy remembered what Nikki had told him all those months ago, when he was first healing Jack. Are you saying that heroes have killed villains before? Yes, they have. And if you hadn't saved Iceman, he would have been another death they covered up. And then, what Puffy had told him less than a week ago. I tried to stop it, but soon he was dead, and when I reported the hero responsible to the committee, they just didn't do anything. The hero committee covered it up, didn't they? Tommy asked in a horrified whisper. Phil nodded. After it happened, Puffy stopped the fight and apologized for what happened. She also promised to make sure that Dream received proper punishment and that if he didn't, she would stop working for the heroes. So that's why she retired. Tommy finished, nodding to himself. Because nothing happened when Dream killed H-Bomb. Exactly. Fundy ended up retiring not long after because it scared him so badly. Phil finished, looking pained. And that was when I knew I had to do whatever I could to take that organization down. Bile rose in the back of Tommy's throat. He'd been told that heroes had killed villains before, but to see how much pain the Syndicate was in because of the friend they'd lost, to hear his name and know that Dream was the one responsible, Tommy was starting to understand why Wilbur said he wouldn't be able to promise Tommy he wouldn't kill again. H-Bomb was my best friend. Nikki then chimed in, her voice softer than usual, but echoing in the room all the same. He was the one who introduced me to Wilbur, Techno, and Phil in the first place. I wasn't involved in any of the villain, vigilante hero stuff, but I knew who H-Bomb and his friends were, and I understood why they did what they did. She kept her eyes on the table, and a scowl flashed across her face. When Techno called me to tell me what had happened, though, I realized I couldn't just sit on the sidelines and wait for this to happen to more people. The system was bullshit, and I wanted to play my part in taking it down just like the rest of them. Nikki continued, her voice still quiet, yet razor sharp at the same time. So after I met Jack, and we got our footing as a duo, I contacted Wilbur again, and asked if we could join the Syndicate, which is how we ended up here. From there our numbers just grew. Phil picked up. After H-Bomb's death and the loss of Fundy, it was just back to me, Will, and Tech. But then Nikki and Jack joined. And then about a year later, Quackity contacted us about making a business deal. Then, well, I started talking to Sam. Oh yeah. Tommy frowned. How did that whole thing happen anyway? With Sam, switching sides. At this, Sam cleared his throat, drawing all eyes in the room to him. Well, the story is kind of simple in all honesty. The gist of it was that Phil just started talking to me during our fights. He just pointed out a lot of the flaws in the system and how unfair it all was. And it got me to start really thinking about what I was doing. Truth be told, I didn't think that would work at all, Phil said, chuckling a bit. I was just saying shit to distract him. Had no clue Sam was actually listening to me. It worked out in the end because I actually did pay attention. Sam replied. I just started noticing all these problems, and how we as heroes rarely ever got punished for our actions. And I'd known the captain. She and I had been friends before she retired, so I'd heard her complaints plenty of times before then, too. But I never took them to heart. But I guess what really changed things for me was when Dream made that building collapse, and the hero committee barely did anything to punish him. Sighing, Sam took a beat to push his dark green hair out of his face. I know it was an accident, but he was supposed to be grounded from hero duty, and then the committee pulled him out at the second they had an excuse. That was really the moment where I saw that this organization didn't actually care about keeping its heroes in check, as long as the funding kept rolling in. So when I next found myself and my fellow heroes in a fight against Phil, Wilbur, and Techno, and Phil started asking me again why I was doing this, I just couldn't find a good answer. So I left. You left mid-fight? Tommy asked. I did, yeah. I decided I wanted out, so I tried to just flee down a nearby alley. But I, had a run-in with Supreme. Sam said, dropping his eyes to the table as his lips twisted into something pained. Tommy thought back to all the news reports when Warden had first deserted the heroes. How there were rumors about how Warden had viciously attacked his own healer without warning. Looking at Sam now, Tommy could see none of the bloodlust that the media claimed Warden had been holding inside of him. He could only see regret and guilt. So much guilt, Tommy could see from his eyes that it was practically drowning him. I didn't mean to hurt him, Sam admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper as he wrung his hands together. I ran into him in the alley when I was trying to leave, and when he figured out what I was doing, he tried to get me to stop. We got into an argument, and I swung my trident out, but not with the intent to hurt him. I just wanted to make it like a warning to get him to back off, but when he... Sam's breathing hitched as he grimaced, as if just remembering the story was almost too painful for him. I think he was trying to move towards me. Not to attack. I know he wouldn't do that. I'm not sure what he was doing, but he came towards me when I wasn't expecting it, and my trident just... He cut himself off, and Phil leaned over to rest a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, Sam. I think he gets it. Nodding, Sam took a breath to steady himself. I was horrified by what had happened. But Dream showed up in the alley right at that moment, and I knew Supreme could heal himself, so I decided I just had to get away from him. I ran out and rejoined the fight, but this time I fought with Phil and the others. When they decided it was time to flee, they took me with them, and I've been a member of the Syndicate ever since. Sam finished, his shoulders slumping as he stopped wringing his hands. Tommy let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That was a lot. The media had made Warden's betrayal sound so much more spiteful than it was. Instead of the hero suddenly getting a taste for blood and wanting to kill his fellow heroes, he just wanted to leave, and ended up having to fight his way out. Fuck, man, Tommy muttered. That's rough. It's all right. I know that leaving was still the right thing to do, even if I didn't go about it in the best way. Sam shrugged, the mechanical arms behind his head shrugging as well. But yeah, that's how I ended up joining. And then he recruited me a year later, Hannah announced proudly, cutting through the tension with a cheerful smile. My situation was pretty simple. I worked as a vigilante because I thought heroes were bullshit. I ran into Sam a few times when I was on patrol, and he started talking to me about my motives and stuff. And then he eventually convinced me to become a villain and join the Syndicate. Convinced you? You practically begged me to join, Sam said, looking less tense now as he shot a wry grin at Hannah. Oh, shut up. No, I didn't, Hannah protested, punching him in the arm. You were the one begging me. You literally stabbed me at one point. Why would I beg you to join the Syndicate? Come on, don't be such a baby. It was one tiny little stab wound, and you were fine. Hannah groaned, rolling her eyes. Please don't stab each other and give me more headaches to deal with, Tommy grumbled, running his hands through his hair. There was a chorus of laughter at this, and Tommy felt a familiar arm slide around his shoulders. Don't worry, Toms. There'll be no unnecessary stabbing anymore, Wilbur reassured him, tugging his chair closer. Tommy huffed and elbowed Wilbur in the side to get him to let go, but the clingy bitch refused to move his arm, so Tommy sighed and leaned against his older brother in defeat. All right. So, Tommy, do you have any more questions for us? Phil asked once the table had gone silent again. I don't think so. Tommy shook his head. But I'll let you know if I think of anything. The truth was, while Tommy probably would have more questions later on, he had already learned so much in such a short span of time that he needed a break to process everything. He'd already learned how and why the syndicate was formed, how each of the members joined, and he'd even learned about the death of H-94. If he got told any more stories, he was pretty sure his head was going to explode. Besides, he lived with Phil. If he got more questions later, he could just ask him there. Phil nodded. Sounds good. So I suppose this leaves us with our next order of business for the night. What to do about... The blaring of a ringing phone cut Phil off mid-sentence. There was an awkward pause as everyone glanced around the table to see whose phone it was, and it took Tommy an embarrassingly long time to realize it was coming from him. Cheeks flushing red, Tommy pulled his buzzing phone out of his pocket, wondering how the hell he even got service down here. When he saw it was Tubbo calling him, though, he paused, because he knew that Tubbo was supposed to be out patrolling tonight with Ronbu. Shit. Wait, had they gotten hurt? Fuck, he needed to take this, in case they were injured. Shit, sorry guys, I need to take this. Tommy coughed, awkwardly, ignoring the villain's eyes on him as he pressed answer on the call. Hey Tubbo, everything okay?
Fucking hell. We're fine, Tommy, but some bad shit just went down here.
What's going on? Are you hurt?
No, we're not hurt at all. We weren't even in a fight or anything.
Then what's wrong? Tommy asked, frowning. There was a pause on the other end.
We ran into Dream,
Tubbo said quietly.
He didn't do anything to us, but he told us to pass you a message.
Tommy froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. What was the message? He asked, struggling to keep his voice steady as his heart began to race in his chest. Tubbo took a shaky breath.
I don't know how the fuck he did it, but I guess he finally got evidence of you healing Siren or something.
Tubbo explained, his voice wavering.
And he basically said that if you don't give him what he wants, he's going to have you arrested for aiding the syndicate.
What he wants. Tommy knew exactly what he wanted. There was only one reason he had even kidnapped Tommy in the first place. Dream wanted the identities of the syndicate, and if he didn't get them, he was going to arrest Tommy. Oh, fuck me.